rights, freedoms are absolute and guaranteed to all persons, citizens and non-citizens alike. The Bill of Rights enumerates these rights and freedoms forcefully. Congress shall make no law. But ever since the tragic events of 9/11, America's civil freedoms have been threatened. Everyone is affected when the government abuses its power or targets a segment of its citizens. When such government abuses take place, they do not end with the other or with the weakest link. Let us never forget the saying of Pastor Martin Niemöller over 65 years ago. He said, "When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the socialists, I remained silent. I was not a socialist. And when they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I wasn't a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak out." Today, I want to discuss two issues that are affecting lots of people, hundreds of people in America, and I only have a few minutes to do so. So to the best of my ability, I want to bring everyone up to speed, if you're not already, on what I consider to be the chilling effects of two things. What is called material support statutes, and we'll talk about that, and what we call preemptive prosecutions. Keep in mind, as we go through this, the effects that these have, not only on the individuals that are charged or convicted of certain crimes, but their families, their spouses, their children, their friends, their communities. The impact is tremendous. To begin, as we know, it's a crime for anyone, or any person or organization, to knowingly provide, attempt, or conspire to provide material support or resources to any individual or organization designated as a terrorist by the U.S. Treasury or State Department. That's what the law says. The law says you can't provide any material support or resources to anyone as a designated terrorist. Meaning that the law prohibits essentially any support in the form of money, services, personal or other support to any organization or individual that is designated. But the problem, and I think we all agree that if we're going to support the laws of America, it would include supporting the law of material support and how it's applied to terrorists. I'm for security. I'm for safety. But this law of material support has a problem. It is not defined hardly at all as to what material support really is and what resources really means. And this law that governs material supports is vague and broadly defined, was highlighted in a very high-profile case, in case you missed it. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, a decision last year regarding a case named the Humanitarian Law Project, the current material support statutes, this Humanitarian Law Project, set a case to the Supreme Court saying that various humanitarian organizations wanted to provide services, training, and advocacy to terrorist organizations to support the legitimate, legal, non-terrorist functions of the terrorist organizations and to help them reduce or eliminate their need to engage in terrorist activities. The organizations wanted to define the material support laws. They considered to be vague. They considered to include free association, free speech. They had many examples to say, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? Can we do something to stop terrorism? The Supreme Court answered, and I'm going to go over that. But basically the Supreme Court said that the material support statutes can criminalize life-saving humanitarian aid to civilians. That material support can criminalize efforts at peace building. It said material support can criminalize free speech that advocates only lawful, nonviolent activity and even it furthers non-terrorist acts, and where it furthers no terrorist acts whatsoever. They said, yes, that can all be considered material support. In this case, the argument was presented that may a humanitarian organization provide material support to a designated organization in the form of speech that supports legitimate non-terrorist activities. And as to this question, the court held that the statute properly prohibited such free speech. Said, yes, it does limit free speech, but for two legitimate reasons. They said there's two reasons and they're legitimate and you can do so. They said the first reason is fungibility. They said that any time that an organization receives a benefit from a transaction, right, if it's fungible, according to the government, the material support given to a terrorist for non-terrorist purposes would allow a terrorist organization to shift resources to terrorist activities, assuming that the terrorist would have to pay for whatever you were doing, the humanitarian aid, that you doing that freed up other resources for them to do something harmful, therefore it's a terrorist act. Because it's relieving them of providing the good work so that they can do more bad work. You follow that? Now, the Humanitarian Law Project argued that, and they pretty much demolished this argument as it applies to free speech by saying that the fungibility argument could apply only to financial support. Monetary support could be transferred to terrorist activities, to do terrorist activities. But ideas are not fungible. Literature promoting a non-terrorist activity cannot be shifted internally to support terrorist activities. Right? So they're telling them, there's got to be something we can do to prevent, help, assist on this war on terror. No, the Supreme Court said that there were, in the question we read before, may an organization provide material support in the form of free speech that supports legitimate non-terrorist activities? Well, the court turned its attention to the word legitimate. And the Supreme Court ruled also, the remaining argument left to the court for limiting free speech was legitimization. The court said, free speech supporting non-terrorist activities also helps lend legitimacy to foreign terrorist groups. And legitimacy that makes it easier for those groups to persist, to recruit members, and to raise funds, all of which facilitate more terrorist acts. And because the government advanced no other argument, I believe that this is the basic logic behind the material support statute. The statute tries to delegitimize terrorist groups by criminalizing any positive support given to them, even by free speech, direct or non-direct. So the only way to deal with the terrorist organization is to kill it, or just to convict it and put it in jail. Jimmy Carter can no longer talk and advocate peace for a terrorist organization. You can't negotiate and say, look, this is a better way to end this conflict. This is a way to solve your resolutions. You cannot engage in any diplomacy, any beneficial act. Anything that you think will prevent them from doing anything further is prohibited. It's considered material support. Now, this law of material support also provides a framework for criminalizing ideology or even thought. The framework for preemptive prosecutions, also known as thought crime prosecutions. We all know the term thought crimes brings to mind George Orwell, 1984, and his police state, where doublespeak is par for society. Slogans like war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, were all considered to be not only normal but law in his Orwellian book. And you had to believe and think the same way. And if you thought differently, it was a crime. More recently, a blockbuster movie, Minority Report with Tom Cruise, thought crimes, trying to get to people before the crime is committed. It's a chilling reality, to say the least. But could it really happen? After 9/11, the fear of terrorism caused Americans to deviate from the equal protection of the law for all Americans, and launched a wave of U.S. government retaliation against Muslims in America that bore no connection to any individual's guilt. This is most recently seen in the U.S. government's preemptive prosecution program, in which innocent Muslims are being prosecuted for some contrived crime based on their character or their ideology, or ostensibly to preempt them from possibly becoming involved in terrorism at some future time. Preemptive prosecutions take their inspiration from former Vice President Dick Cheney. He had what he calls Dick Cheney's 1% doctrine, that if there's even 1% chance of some terrorist act occurring, the government must act to preempt it as though it was a certainty. Let that sink in. The government launched the war in Iraq allegedly to preempt the Iraqi government from sharing weapons of mass destruction with terrorists. However, no such weapons were found, and it was later claimed that intelligence was faulty. The U.S. rounded up suspected terrorists abroad and incarcerated them indefinitely at Guantanamo Bay and other places in order to preempt them from attacking the U.S. Military and government officials now say that the Bush administration knew that most of the detainees were innocent, but did not care. Having a large number of detainees served the administration's purpose of creating fear of Islamic extremists. The U.S. government has also preemptively prosecuted hundreds of innocent Muslims in the U.S. for contrived crimes on the pretext of preempting them from committing crimes in the future. It seems clear that the U.S. government does not care that most of these Muslim defendants are also innocent. It serves the U.S. government's purpose to claim that it caught hundreds of terrorists in the U.S., even if the defendants, in fact, never intended to harm the U.S. Since 9/11, the government has targeted certain individuals and groups because of their beliefs, thoughts, and associations to be jailed in the name of security while facing government's immense power and massive prosecutional resources. Such thought crime prosecutions are a direct violation of our Constitution because they embody the criminalization of the First Amendment type activities. For instance, I'll give some examples. During the 6-month trial in Florida in 2005, much of the government's evidence against Dr. Sami El-Arian consist of speeches the university professor delivered, lectures that he presented, articles he wrote, magazines he edited, books that he owned, conferences he attended, rallies he attended, interviews he gave, news he heard, the websites he never even accessed, even an imaginary conversation with him that took place in the dream of one of his co-defendants was presented to the jury as evidence. Thankfully, it was no surprise that with most of the 100 counts between all 4 defendants in that trial, not a single guilty verdict on any count was returned by the jury. But it didn't keep the government from trying. In the Holy Land Foundation in Dallas, Texas, in 2008, the government admitted that donations collected by the Holy Land were spent on food, clothing, shelter, education, and medical supplies. The government's theory was not that the Holy Land supported violence, but that it helped some charity committees, called Zakat committees, in Palestine, in the occupied territories, allegedly associated with Hamas, to win the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people. The crime of the Holy Land, as argued by the government, it was winning the hearts and minds of Palestinians. For the organization, for the Zakat committees, they theorized were under the influence of Hamas. 2 defendants in that trial were sentenced to 65 years behind bars for feeding the wrong people. In 2004, computer science graduate student Sami El-Hussein, can't say his name, was acquitted in Idaho after being charged with terrorism for establishing and maintaining a website on Palestine. Wow, I don't have time. But in the Northern District of Virginia, Islamic scholar Dr. Ali Al-Tamimi was convicted and sent to life in prison in 2005 for issuing a fatwa. He issued a fatwa, it's called an Islamic legal opinion, it's his opinion, against the American invasion of Afghanistan and the Indian occupation of Kashmir. So he was so strong in how he worded his conviction, it led to his conviction. These thought crime prosecutions used by the government are reminiscent of a tyrannical police state, as James Madison correctly prophesied. The means of defense against foreign danger usually have become the instruments of tyranny at home. I only have 2 minutes. I can't finish. Wow. Let me get to...